Welcome to the first episode in a two-part Legendarium series about Jules Verne's From the Earth to the Moon. In part 1, To the Moon, we will be talking about the first half of this extraordinary book. Jules Verne came of age in a world undergoing revolutionary changes thanks to new inventions. Railroads crisscrossed Europe and North America. The U.S. Civil War saw the use of crude submarines. Verne often wrote admiringly of new technology and the men who could invent and use it. By the year 1865, Jules Verne imagined something that his fellow men only fantasized about, a journey to the moon itself. There had been many tales of voyages to the moon before Verne. In 1638, Francis Godwin wrote a short story about an explorer who trained a flock of geese to fly an aerial carriage to the moon. Daniel Defoe, most famous for writing Robinson Crusoe, also wrote a 1705 story called The Consolidator, about a ship powered by magical spirits, which of course travel to the moon. A third 1728 satire, fittingly titled A Trip to the Moon, described a journey powered by gunpowder. And nearly a century later, Edgar Allan Poe wrote of a man named Hans Pfaall, who flew to the moon in a balloon. Poe became the first man to apply scientific fact to a then fanciful journey. He included calculations of distance and even took into account the fact that the atmosphere would thin as his hero flew ever higher. Yet Verne would go far further in applying scientific fact. Though more famous under the title From the Earth to the Moon, it is in fact a novel in two parts. The first novel would be published as De la Terre à la Lune, or From the Earth to the Moon. It appeared on bookshelves during the year 1865, soon after the end of the U.S. Civil War. It is one of the most high-spirited novels that Verne ever wrote. There is almost no struggle or reversal of fortune. Without a serious problem in sight, a visionary group sets out to send men to the moon, and they take boundless joy in doing so. That might be in part because of Verne's great admiration for the United States and its pioneering spirit. He opens the novel in the Baltimore Gun Club, populated by a pack of zealous militarists whose great passion is building bigger and better artillery, with no concern for the carnage their inventions cause. Indeed, they mourn the end of the war, which gave them a reason for living. Pitcairn, the club's statistician, estimated that each member killed 2,375 men and a fraction. It is fitting to mention fractions of men, for many of the artillerymen are on crutches, have wooden legs, hinged arms, hooks for hands, and rubber jaws. Verne wrote, Pitcairn had further calculated that the gun club could muster slightly more than one arm for every 4 persons and only 2 legs for every 6. Grim satire continues as Tom Hunter rests his wooden legs on the fireplace, which seems a rather poor idea, and laments that there is no war in sight. Yet Verne also writes, again admiringly, when an American has an idea, he looks for a second to share it with. When they become 3, they elect a president and 2 secretaries. 4, they appoint an archivist, and 5, they're in business. Verne much admired American scientific societies compared to the snobbish and closed-off royal societies of Europe. And it is President Barbicane who revives the club's sagging spirits by suggesting that with no war to fight, they fire a shell at the moon. It captivates not only the gun club, but their home city of Baltimore so much that when an English theatrical troupe opens the play Much Ado About Nothing in Baltimore, the people take it as an insult to Barbicane and his fantastic idea. They invade the theater and tear apart the seating and stage until the director changes the play to As You Like It, much to the mob's delight. He uses his admiration for American passion and spontaneity to give comic moments in his work. Indeed, in part because of the men who started the grand venture, the book originally appeared under the title The Baltimore Gun Club or The American Gun Club. A century later, Verne would be proven correct that a flight to the moon would be a huge expedition that could not be funded by a single individual. He also guessed correctly that the United States would fund it, though he did not foresee that the United States government, or at least one of its agencies, would take a leading role. Another moment of comic satire appears when President Barbicane chooses a location for the great undertaking. He chooses Florida and Texas as possible locations. When representatives of the two states meet with Barbicane, they exchange insults with one another, threaten violence, and finally challenge each other to a duel. Barbicane ultimately chooses Florida because it has only one ideal location, while Texas hosted nearly a dozen. He would prefer to focus on his great cannon called the Columbiad, not a war between a dozen fiercely loyal and competitive Texas constituencies. From there on, the first novel becomes one of the first techno-thrillers. Entire chapters focus on characters debating metallurgy, types of gunpowder, and the moon's orbit. Much is also devoted to the practical engineering of the Columbiad, the giant cannon which will fire a shell housing men at the moon. Although Verne never named what he simply called the vehicle projectile, it is fair to call it the first real spaceship in literature. The novel shifts a little when Michel Ardan, the only European character in the book, volunteers to become a passenger. What started as a violent and military act, shooting the moon with a weapon, now takes on a peaceful and human dimension. It has become a voyage of exploration. Arden is described as a man with a large head, a great mane of hair, and a high forehead, which makes other men believe him to be a man of great intelligence. This stems from the now discredited belief in physiognomy, a supposed science in which a person's intelligence can be judged by their facial features and head size. Ardan joins Barbicane with the crew, yet there is a third man in play. Captain Nicholl is the closest man the novel has to an antagonist. Nicholl hates Barbicane with a passion because the two men had a bitter rivalry during the war, cut short by peace at a time when Barbicane took the lead. Nicholl serves as devil's advocate, asking questions that force Barbicane to justify his theories. Yet he does nothing more than make a series of 5 public bets that the experiment will fail at 5 critical points. Nicholl does prompt Barbicane to challenge him to a duel by calling him an ignoramus, but Verne makes it clear that Barbicane is being just as petty as Nicholl. Indeed, Barbicane makes the duel one Verne especially hated, in which the two men hunt each other through the countryside rather than simply meeting with pistols at dawn. The other members of the Gun Club, fearing the loss of one or two great men of science, bravely slip into the duel zone. When they find Nicholl freeing a helpless bird from a giant spider web, they urge him to show compassion to Barbicane as he showed compassion to the bird. Nicholl not only agrees, but upon meeting Barbicane face to face, agrees to become the third man on the expedition. From there, the work really begins. Verne did not suggest rocket power, but came close with his description of a gigantic cannon. Using backhoes, the Baltimore Gun Club digs a rough gun mold 900 feet into the earth and 60 feet in diameter. After digging the tube-shaped hole in only 5 days, it is loaded with 400,000 pounds of high explosives. Nicholl begins happily paying the 5 bets as he is proven wrong, and caught up in the spirit of the expedition, he simply calls them contributions to the great work. A great wooden wheel is made from sturdy oak, and it serves as a platform for laborers as they build a bore mold from sand and clay. This allows for the pouring of molten metal used to make a cannon that is buried into the earth. The Gun Club celebrates with a dinner held 500 feet down. The aeronauts then go 500 feet down, loaded into the vehicle projectile. A crowd gathered as the explosives are triggered and the heroes blasted to the moon. Astronomers around the world and readers are left in suspense, for immense dust clouds hide the view of the shell from telescopes. By the time the clouds disperse, the ship is no longer visible, hopefully pulled into the moon's gravitational orbit. The book ends with acting Gun Club president J.T. Maston proclaiming his faith that the three brave men will be safe. It is a striking place to end this installment, and it became clear that Verne would write a sequel, a common practice for him, but his readers would have to wait 5 years for it. Thankfully, you will have to wait much less time than 5 years for part series. That wraps things up for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.